Welcome to the FML Podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyse your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sachdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome, everyone. In this episode of the FML Podcast, we're joined by Eric Fulwiler, founder and CEO of Rival. Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we sort of dive in, just tell us about your career journey to date.
The short version is I'm not from the UK, as you can tell, although I've been here for the last 6 years, but I'm from the States. I worked in a bunch of different startups, in my early 20s. That's kind of my background, and I'd say very much my DNA is startup. I spent a stint at Forbes back when the .com team was separate from the magazine team, and I was actually the first social media person there, set up Forbes on Twitter. And so that brought me into this world of what at that point was called Web 2.0 in New York and San Francisco. I crossed paths with a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, who was setting up this agency called VaynerMedia. And so I went there very early on, first 15 employee, and then, as probably some people listening know, that just kind of exploded. It's now 1,500 people, and I think probably the biggest independent digital agency in the world. That was a wild ride. That set off 10 years for me in the advertising agency world, including moving to London to open the first international office for VaynerMedia. After 10 years in the agency world, I thought that was quite enough of that. And so I then got into fintech, which is, of course, where we crossed paths when I was chief marketing and commercial officer of 11FS. 11FS, for those who haven't heard of them, one, I wasn't doing my job well enough if you haven't heard of us by now, but they are a boutique consultancy that builds greenfield digital propositions. So we would come into, a big bank and build their version of a challenger bank, for example. So it's all about really a challenger approach to product innovation, if you will. And then I did that for a few years. And then as of November, I finally set up my own business with a few people that's called Rival. And we are a marketing innovation consultancy. So I saw a lot of what really worked well with 11FS and their model and the need that I think a lot of incumbents have to think differently, think like a challenger, build product like a challenger. But I think the marketing side is just as important, to think like a challenger and act like a challenger with how you do marketing as well. So we are a boutique consultancy that does brand strategy, go-to-market strategy, culture and capability development within businesses that want to think and act more like a challenger with how they do their marketing.
How did your time at VaynerMedia kind of influence the journey of where you are now, sort of this sort of thinking and acting like a challenger? Did that come a little bit later on with 11FS?
No, it was massive. I mean, I worked for Gary for 7 years, which felt probably more like 17. In good ways and also very intense ways. It was building a very, very big business in the early days. So it was intense. But I learned so much. He has definitely had the biggest impact on me professionally and in many ways personally. So a lot of the thinking that if people know him and you've seen what he talks about, what VaynerMedia is all about, that's always been there from the very beginning. And so I was very much kind of baptized in that way of thinking about marketing. And it's definitely provided the foundation for my professional career, going to 11FS as CMO, and now what we do here at Rival. And I've taken a lot of what I've seen work in the fintech world, being at 11FS and being kind of in the middle or sitting on the fence, if you will, between the fintech challengers and the traditional FS incumbents. And that's kind of what gave me the idea and the concept for Rival, because I think it's so fascinating how differently startups think about their marketing and go to market compared to incumbents. And so that contrast and that difference is really what Rival is all about, getting to the root of, okay, what is it that these startups and challengers are doing differently? And can we bring that into any business that wants to grow in that way?
I mean, that's a brilliant point. And we've seen, a lot of the incumbents, Marcus is a great example of an incumbent launching a brand, dare I say it, had to sort of leave with their tail between their legs a little bit. What do you think is the main difference or the main reason why startups get that sort of go-to-market piece arguably so right and some incumbents have been getting it so wrong?
Fundamentally, I really believe it comes down to culture. And I don't want people to tune out because I know that gets said a lot, but like it just is the answer. And I'd also be curious what you hear, but it all stems backwards from that because culture is the way that things get done inside an organization. Therefore, it guides everything that happens and the outputs that that creates. I think there's some fundamental differences between the culture within a challenger organization and the culture in an incumbent organization. And for people that have either been in both or been exposed to both, like you know exactly what I'm talking about. Challengers are inherently much more long-term oriented. They're much more motivated and committed to the change that they want to bring to the world. They're much more scrappy and creative with how they go about things. So it just creates a different way of doing things if you think about things and have a different perspective on the world. A way to talk about that hopefully is a little bit more helpful to the people listening because you can't, it's hard to change culture once it's there. And I know we have it's more the entrepreneurs and the challengers who are listening to this. Fundamentally, if a business is at scale, and that's any type of scale, you have a responsibility to deliver for both the short term and the long term. And another way of thinking of that is you need to run the business that you have, but you also need to change the business for the future to make sure that it's still competitive. And so that's the thing that I think about is if we're working with a big insurance company or a big bank, they need to deliver the results for next quarter or for this year. They need to own the short term, but there needs to be somebody who is thinking about the future and somebody who's thinking about changing things. And sometimes that's an innovation group within a big organization. Sometimes it's they take one of their smaller brands or their smaller products and do it differently. But fundamentally, what a challenger means to me is someone or some organization that is fit for purpose for the world of today, which is you're thinking about things without being encumbered by the legacy of how they were done in the past. We talk a lot about tech debt in the financial service world, core banking technology systems, and just how old and outdated those are. There's also marketing debt in big organizations. This idea of like this big campaign that goes out on TV and it's one thing to everybody. That's not the way that the world works today. And so fundamentally, it comes down to that. Challengers are able to think about the world from scratch for what exists right now and take advantage of it. And that's what drives their growth.
I absolutely agree with you. I think culture is a big part of it. I think it's also the sort of legacy processes, procedures and systems that create so much red tape that it's actually really difficult to get a small product or proposition out of the front door. And I think the other mindset as well is that when you're a startup, you don't have that brand awareness. And actually, if an incumbent brand or a larger brand sort of puts a campaign out, even if it's not a great campaign, it will still do okay, because they're still riding on the brand legacy that they've created, because obviously challenger brands don't have that.
Yeah.
How do you as Rival help your clients take on that challenger mindset? Do you try and change culture or do you take a different approach?
So just going back to what you said about the processes and red tape, I 100% agree. I would argue that is a symptom of the root cause of the culture, which is everybody needs to follow the rules. We don't want to take risks. We don't want to do things differently. Computer says no. Like, I'm sorry, that just is what it is. Like, that's a cultural thing that I think outputs in these systems and bureaucracies and policies that ultimately slow things down. And speed is one of the biggest advantages that challengers have over incumbents. So that's kind of why I always come back to culture, because I think all roads end there. If you identify a symptom of an incumbent or a positive symptom of a challenger, I think it all kind of comes back to that. In terms of how we work with our clients, so the first thing is we launched this business in November. We're 3.5 months in. So I can speak a little bit from experience, but I can also speak from intent and ideas of how we plan to grow this thing. So the first thing is that we've got this first principle of how we work with anybody, which is we try to put ourselves out of a job as quickly as possible. So we are trying to transfer as much of our experience and expertise to our client as quickly as we can. And so what that means is that ultimately we're really focused on the people that we're working with. We might be delivering a strategy, we might be delivering a workshop, we might be delivering a plan for how they want to do things. But the thing that we are most focused on is, okay, in these interactions that we have, can we give them the capabilities that we have? Because I think ultimately that's why a business hires a consultancy. We're not an advertising agency. We don't do the execution. So they're hiring us for our experience and our expertise and the capabilities that we can bring them. And so I think we're doing our job the best if we can give them those capabilities as quickly as possible.
Kind of going back a step and looking at 11FS. I think one thing that 11FS has done, it done really well. It was kind of noticeable when you kind of came on board in the direction of the marketing that it went. They always felt like two things. One, a challenger, and two, it felt like a participant in the fintech. They didn't feel like a management consultancy. What was your sort of train of thought around that?
I can't speak to the intent at the beginning because obviously I joined, I think the company was 4 years old around there when I joined. But it definitely became part of my strategy for how we wanted to position the brand. Obviously, we had strategies and models that we implemented while in the time that I was at 11FS, and there's some fantastic people there that really deserve much more credit for how that brand has grown and how the business has grown. But I think part of what has made it successful is a lot of the raw material was there to begin with, Sure, they started a podcast in 2016 before everybody else did, but also they're really good at it. David, Simon, Jason, the folks that were on the podcast, like charismatic, super smart, very engaging. And the same thing with the brand, like whether it was intentional or not. And again, I can't speak to that. They ended up in this place where the brand sat in the fintech world, but serviced the incumbent FSI world. And that gave them a lot of credibility and it gave them a lot of understanding and a lot of connections to the innovation that was happening there that they could then bring to their clients. So I think you're smart to pick up on that because it is something that I think people feel but don't always see explicitly. And it was definitely something that I thought a lot about and tried to maximize in the time I was there.
And now your position in Rival, are you looking to work primarily in the fintech sector or are you looking into other sectors as well?
So the offering is meant to be industry agnostic. That said, as you can imagine with where I'm coming from and just where there seems to be a lot of need for what we do, we're doing a lot in financial services. And so that is working with some incumbents. It's also working with some fintechs because again, our tagline and our fundamental belief is every business can be a challenger. So while that maybe resonates a little bit more with incumbents that don't think of themselves like challengers, really it just comes down to what is a modern way of doing marketing that is going to drive the growth of your business and deliver the results that you're looking for. Because at the end of the day, the role of marketing is to build a brand and deliver business results. So it's ultimately about that. So yeah, financial services right now is our biggest vertical. We do a lot in B2B, FMCG, retail. That probably rounds out the top 3 or 4.
So you talked about culture and you talked about giving clients the tools. What's your sort of secret sauce behind it all? What's the reason why incumbents are choosing Rival over, say, another consultancy or just bringing in a whole new CMO, for example?
Well, I think part of it is the challenger narrative. We didn't come up with the term and we're not the only one that focuses on challenger marketing, but I think that's part of it and resonates with some people. Part of it is the way that we do things. So the work ourselves out of a job, people not process, outcomes not outputs, etc. And then at the end of the day, business like ours, and I'm sure like yours, there's the brands and then there's the people that you have on your team. And so a lot of it comes down to, while I've learned some things in 15, 16 years of doing digital marketing, much more importantly to this business that I want to build, I've come across some amazing people. And luckily, I've been able to kind of slowly bring them on board to what we're doing. And so that's a big selling point as well. And then, we don't have the price point that a Bain or a McKinsey or a BCG does either. So that helps.
Not yet, anyway. You said, you finally made the jump into setting up your own company. How have you found that journey?
It's been long. It's, what has it been? 3.5 months? I swear it's been at least a year. When I think back on like Christmas was only 6 weeks ago or whatever, just packing a lot in, and part of it is the hours, which I think just comes with the territory, at least for me. I feel like I get this shot at doing this and I'm going to give it everything that I have so that if it doesn't work, I know it's not because I didn't try hard enough. So in part, I'm doing it to myself. I'm also doing it to myself because, I'm not trying to build Eric Fulwiler Consulting. And I'm not trying to build a lifestyle business. I'm trying to build a real thing. We did 0 to 80 people at VaynerMedia London in 4 years, and I want to be on a similar type of trajectory to that. The challenges of being an entrepreneur aren't talked about enough. I'm really interested in this kind of Instagramification of LinkedIn, where everybody posts the wins, everybody posts the awards, everybody posts the new clients, the new hires. I'm super excited. I'm super humbled. I'm super grateful, et cetera, et cetera. And don't get me wrong, I do my fair share of that. You're building a brand, whether it's your personal one or your company one. Like, you got to put that out there. at the same time, I'm trying to balance the conversation a little bit. And that's in part because I really believe that. And it's in part because I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs out there that they see all of these wins and all of these amazing things that all these people are doing, and they think that they are worse because they don't see updates that reflect how they feel. This day was really hard. This week went really badly. I feel like I made a big mistake. That is much more, at least for me, what happens. That's 80% of it. 80% of it is a grind with the occasional icing on the cake that's wins. So I think the conversation just needs to be a little bit more balanced.
I absolutely agree. I do think there's more downs than ups. You kind of need to have the tenacity and strength to like kind of just sort of see your way through it and actually enjoy the wins when they do happen. I agree with you about sort of the Instagrammable piece on LinkedIn. I think that's just generally everywhere. I mean, it's on Instagram, it's on...
Yeah, it's just human nature. Yeah, totally.
And there's always that, so-and-so has raised so much and, such and such companies doing this, that and the other and whatnot. And it turns into sort of trying to keep up with the, not necessarily the competition, but just keep up with other people and other founders. How do you balance the stress of knowing that? And I think particularly, given the fact that you have such a strong pedigree, knowing that you've sort of put yourself to task that you want to stay on that trajectory of 0 to 80 in 4 years, how do you keep the balance with that? And how do you manage the stress of that and your emotions around that?
Badly right now. I'll put it that way. I mean, I've got my, hacks or my systems, and I'm happy to share those. But fundamentally, on a much deeper level, I really feel like perspective and self-awareness are the two most important raw materials to any success, professional or personal. Perspective, because if you recognize what you have, like me, I can't speak for you, but most likely somebody doing what you're doing and the people listening here, we have so many great things in our lives. And so it might be that that deal didn't go the way you wanted to, or that person didn't come on board, or you had a bad day. But if you can keep things in perspective about what really matters, that really helps to ground me, at least. And then the self-awareness piece is the more you know yourself, the more confidence you have with what you're good at and what you're bad at. And I just think it makes your life much simpler. So I think about those two things a lot. And then in terms of my hacks and rituals, I try to meditate every day. I'm not sure if that's helping me yet, but I'm trying to stick to it. I work out. That is my biggest thing. I need that. I'm definitely addicted to that at this point, more mentally than physically, but it is what it is. I try to write. I don't have a therapist. I'd love to find one. I just haven't been able to. And so instead, I try to put my thoughts down whenever I have time every few weeks of what am I thinking, what am I feeling, just try to get in touch with myself and I guess self-therapy in a way. I pretty much have cut out drinking, actually, which has helped hugely because you just feel better and you just sleep better. And sleep is a huge part to managing stress. So I definitely don't think I have the answers. Those are some of the things that I'm working on, but it's a constant learning process and it is an uphill battle. And I think that's my biggest thing is if people are feeling stressed and, it feels like a grind, you're not the only one. So don't feel alone.
I cut out a lot of drinking. I still, have a beer on a Friday night, but yeah, I've certainly slowed it down because I just want to be sharp the next day. It's also about sort of setting the tone at your company as well, right? If you as the founder, as the owner, as the MD or whatever, sort of coming in a little bit, sharp, can't think of a better word, then that's naturally going to sort of, set the tone of how everybody else is going to be in your business. And I think if you're coming in and you're on the top of your game, it kind of allows, the rest of the team to rise to that as well. I'm a big believer that if we've got to pull a late night to get some work done, then I'll be in there with the team, rolling my sleeves up, helping them to try and deliver what needs delivering. How do you manage with sort of competition and keeping up with those around you? Because that's something that when I speak to my sort of business owner or entrepreneur friends, that's something that tends to come up quite a bit.
If somebody sends me something or I see something that another consultancy is doing, I'll take a look at it, but it's never on my list. It's never something that I'm thinking about where it's like I need to figure out what these other consultancies are doing. And that's just because the answer is always with the customer. It just is. And so I'm trying to stay as focused as I can on having conversations with senior marketers to understand what they're looking for. And maybe there's an opportunity that we can deliver what they're looking for. That's it. That's really it at the end of the day. That will always lead you in the right direction. And so it's not that I'm trying to ignore what other people are doing. It's that I just don't put time into it. It's just not as much of a priority for me. especially when it comes down to, well, that's time that I could be spending speaking to customers or trying to build a team or build a brand or these other things that I think are just more important. So, that's what it is for me. And I'm not sure if that's right. Maybe there is stuff that I could learn from what other consultancies are doing, but especially being in an ad agency business for so long and then being in a product business with 11FS, I'm like, of course, like the customer centric, like jobs to be done. You need to understand what they're looking for and then go build it. And so I think I learned a lot at 11FS about how to build a product that I'm trying to apply to how we build Rival and our offering. And the first principle of that is focus on the customer.
Do you tend to sort of lead with more casual conversations and speaking with them, more ad hoc, or are you more along the lines of conducting more, say, thorough, structured market research?
I am much more of the, as you can probably tell, the casual, unstructured type. In the time before I launched Rival, I just had as many conversations with senior marketers as I could. And I took notes and I tried to triangulate who was saying the same thing. And, that just helped inform how we built our brand and how we built our offering in those early days. There's some people joining the team who are much more structured. We are actually building a research kind of platform. So it's going to be a intelligence and advisory platform where we're going to publish research on challenger marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And so with that, I would imagine that we'll have a much more structured approach to how we develop these insights about what marketers are looking for. But for me and just the way that I function, it's more of the casual, informal conversations.
I'm probably a mixture of both, if I'm honest.
It's probably the right way to be.
It's good to have the casual conversations, but I think I like having also a bit of structure as well.
Yeah.
That kind of gives you a good mix. At the position that you're in at the moment is sort of an early stage founder. What's your sort of key advice to founders that sort of in similar sort of situations as you at the moment, who are just sort of embarking upon that journey or maybe just slightly further in?
I mean, I guess I'll go back to my two principles of perspective and self-awareness, right? So that thing that you are upset about, obsessing over, it probably doesn't matter. It might seem like it matters right now. It probably doesn't matter. Like 99% of things don't matter, but we think they do. So that's one, just kind of gratitude, perspective on what really matters and recognizing things for what they are. Funny, I think back to a conversation I had with Gary at one point where I think somebody was resigning or something. And I was like, Gary, we are totally effed. And he looked at me and he's like, we are never effed. And for some reason that just stuck in my mind because I'm like,
I like that.
Oh, wow, you're right. We're not, it's going to suck. It's not going to be great. It's not what I want, but yeah, we're not effed. We'll figure it out. So that's one. And then I think the self-awareness of learning yourself, learning what you're good at, doubling down on your strengths, trying to get other people to shore up your weaknesses. I think that's really important too. And then the last one is time management is probably the most important skill to anybody's success, but especially when you're an entrepreneur and have so many things you need to deal with. My to-do list is so much broader and more diverse than it was when I was a CMO or when I was an MD. And so just trying to constantly get more efficient and effective with prioritization, time management, saying no to things, I think that is such an important skill as well.
Absolutely resonate on the time management. I read a book, it was called The One Thing. I don't know if you've read it at all. Bottom line is it's just about taking Pareto's principle and just focusing on the 20% of stuff that really, really matters. Do you have a VA? Do you tend to delegate out stuff? How do you tend to sort of make your time so efficient and get the most from it?
I do. I have a couple people on the team and, delegation is a big part of it. But again, the team's not 80 people or 15 people like it was at 11FS. So a lot of it still comes down to me. So it's much more about prioritization, really. That's what I would say. Doing the most important thing first, even if it's the hardest, even if it's not what you want to do. And then it's a constant calibration. I've got my system in terms of how I keep track of my to-do list. And I'm constantly updating that, working backwards from what the quarter's goals are. So it's okay, got the quarter's goals, then you develop your monthly goals. Each week you develop your weekly priorities, and then each day you go through and develop your daily priorities so that ideally, and of course it never works this smoothly in reality, ideally what you are spending your time on each day ties directly to your priorities for the quarter. And then probably the hack that is the most helpful for me is blocking time in my calendar. So I try to have no meetings on Wednesdays, which doesn't always work, but I try. And then I block the first couple hours of every day, 9 to 11, for downtime, because that's when I'm most productive. So that's when I can get through the most important thing, whether it's client work whether it's strategy, whether it's, new business, whatever the most important thing is, I make sure I get that done first thing. So, Pareto principle, 100%. I also love the, what's it called? Like the 2x2 matrix.
Importance versus urgency
Yes.
versus importance. Yeah.
But, theory is one thing, reality is another. It really just comes down to how are you using that 10 minutes? How are you using that 40 minutes? How are you using that day? And making sure that you're doing the most important thing.
Like you said, it doesn't always go to plan. Sometimes it's, there's a little fire. Oh no, everything's on fire. Oh shit, I'm on fire. It's the end of the world. And then, like you said, you get to a point you realise actually it's not that bad at the end of it all. So what's the vision for Rival? What's sort of the key goal at the end of it all in 4 or 5 years' time?
So depending on when this gets published, people might be able to see our employee handbook that we're putting out that talks about the vision, mission, goals, strategic priorities, everything about how we're structuring and running the business. So that might be of interest to people or might be helpful. But to give you the short version of that, because I think that's like 7 or 8 pages long, we want to build a business that can enable any company to grow like a challenger. That's the purpose at the end of the day. And the way that we want to get there is we want to build services, which is what we're doing right now with consulting, and products. For example, what we're doing with this intelligence and advisory platform that helps marketers specifically think and act like challengers. And then we've got our goals when it comes to revenue and profitability, and then also product services mix, because over time we want to become more of a product company than a services company. And then we've got our strategic priorities of how we want to do that. Undervalued talent, underserved clients, scalable solutions, and predictable growth. So I'm happy to go into more detail, but that's kind of the vision. We want to build a meaningful business. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. It's not necessarily about size. It's more about the impact that it can have. But of course, the bigger you are, typically the bigger impact you can have. And then we'll see, who knows if we'll get there? Who knows how we'll all feel once we do get there? But I think there's a lot of opportunities to raise money or, keep going, or we'll have to decide once we get there. But in my mind, it's kind of like a 5-year journey and then see where we're at and decide how we want to keep going from there.
Cool. You said, raise money. My question was going to be, do you intend to do that off the back of organic growth, or will you have an intention to raise, or, are you undecided at the moment?
I would like to keep it organic for as long as possible. But if there's an opportunity to accelerate our growth with the right partner, then, you can always have a plan, but then you need to react to the opportunities that are presented to you. So that's where my head's at. And also it's very early days for us right now. So investment just wouldn't make sense. But at some point, maybe there's an opportunity to do that. But for now, it's just heads down, focus on the customer, build out the offering, build out the team. If we do those things right, then we'll have a lot of opportunities for whatever we decide to do.
I'm a big believer. If you do a great job, especially in a service-led piece, naturally the clients will come to you and the word will spread. The other thing I always tell the team, it's kind of like our mantra is make your client look good.
Yeah.
If you make your marketing lead look good in front of their founder, if you make the founder look good in front of the stakeholders, investors, then you're never going to have a problem. There you go. That's my nugget of advice for today.
I like it.
Cool. Let's kind of jump into the quick fire round. What song do you have on repeat at the moment?
Today I'm listening to a lot of Nipsey Hussle. I listen to a lot of hip hop, sometimes country. I've got 3 young kids, so there's a lot of Olivia Rodrigo happening, whether I like it or not.
Cool. Diverse, I like it. What fintech app are you using the most at the moment?
Wise. We use them for business banking, and then as an American who lives overseas, use them a lot for personal financial stuff too.
Cool. What TV show are you binging on right now?
My wife and I just watched Succession, and then I've heard that Yellow Jackets is really good, so maybe we'll get into that next. But again, 3 kids, and actually my wife is also starting her own business.
Oh, cool.
Do not have a lot of time to watch TV. I think it took us maybe 3 months to watch the 3rd season of Succession. So it's kind of like, it's more of a idea that we get to watch TV than a reality.
Cool. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
Be patient.
I like that. And what's your superpower?
Drinking coffee. I'm very good at drinking coffee. And also, I think the one I put in there for you was discipline. Just for whatever reason, that's just always been like a natural thing for me.
What's the bit of life advice you've ever received?
don't take things too seriously, which I need to remind myself of way more often than I do. So that's a really good one.
I'd agree with that. Who in the world of fintech would you most like to take out for lunch?
I feel like I've been lucky enough in my time at 11FS. I mean, the people there are some of the most brilliant people I've come across. So I feel like I've had lunch with a lot of them already. I'd be really curious to kind of spend time with some of the people that were very early on in the fintech scene in London, like a Tom Bloomfield who set up Monzo. I think that would be really interesting, just the perspective of time of like back then compared to now. I think that'd be interesting. I'd be really interested in, I don't know who it would be, but one of the like big VC firms that's doing a lot of investment in fintech. I think that's super interesting.
And my favorite question, what's one thing I haven't asked that I should have asked?
Maybe, because I talk a lot about challengers and like growing these businesses and all that stuff. So maybe it's something about all the experience of being at VaynerMedia, being at 11FS, now being at Rival, all these other startups. Like what's the one thing that they do differently? Maybe it's something around that.
What is the one thing that they do differently, do you think?
Do it. I think beyond what I've already talked about, they always play offense. They're always trying to come up with the next thing. They're never resting. So I think that's in addition to what I talked about with culture and being fit for purpose for the world of today, I think playing offense is the other one.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you for coming on today. And all of the bits and pieces we spoke about will pop into the show notes. And see you next time.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
The FML Podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.